A very warm welcome. You're watching One India English with me, Anubhuti Gaur, and this is our special show, Global Chit-Chat, where we discuss the important international issues. And we're joined by our foreign policy expert, Mr. Tridivesh Singh Maini. Thanks a lot for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
So today we are going to discuss a very important issue. As we know that the Afghanistan Taliban has said that China is its friend and it has promised that it will not host the Uyghur militants from Xinjiang. So how significant do you think is this statement? What do you make of it?
I think it obviously comes at a very important time when the Taliban claims that it has captured 85% of Afghanistan's territory, and you see not just the Chinese, but even if you see, for instance, if you look at the case of India, embassy staff from Kandahar have been evacuated. And Afghanistan and the Taliban has actually captured some strategic points, in terms of borders also with various neighboring countries and everything. And according to media reports, it was on July 2nd that 210 Chinese citizens were evacuated, and so that this thing happened on the July 2nd. This flight from Kabul to Wuhan basically sort of gave them a safe passage, right? Uh, Now the question is that if you look at the statement, it's interesting. It's basically a couple of questions rise from this. One is the Taliban trying to send out a message that it's not that anti-China, it is more anti the West, right? Of course, it has been holding negotiations and everything. I mean, as we've discussed earlier on umpteen occasions, there is no black and white. You sort of engage at various levels. You want to leverage your strengths and everything. But is it trying to sort of create a wedge which already exists? It's not that, I mean, obviously China and US publicly, their posturing on Afghanistan has also been different, in spite of, as we discussed earlier, some convergence of interests, which they may not confess to. So are they trying to create a further wedge between the West and China? Or is it pure transactionalism that, ultimately whoever takes over, that they don't want to send out the wrong signals to China, which has increased its economic involvement in Afghanistan in recent years, especially since 2014, right? So there are two things which we need to keep in mind. The Chinese generally don't really rule out anything, and they're not quick to dismiss things. So obviously, this statement, the Beijing Beijing would look at this as a sort of overture that probably there is further space for negotiation, of engagement, or for finding common ground. So I think as of now, it's very tough to take this statement seriously given the security situation and given the way the Taliban is advancing and given the way that nobody really seems to have an answer as for the power vacuum. But purely from the Chinese point of view, I think it opens some windows and probably some degree, some apprehensions have been addressed. But of course, I would add that there's a word of caution always, and as you've been seeing the events unfold in Afghanistan, it's always very tough to predict. But generally, uh, this is over the past few years. Obviously, there's a clear realization that for instance, for the Taliban to engage with China, maybe from certain forces will be looked at with less suspicion relative to the West, even though there are differences between the Taliban and China, especially, again, as we had discussed earlier, if you look at the whole Xinjiang issue and the treatment of Uyghurs over there, and the fact that China's worry is something else, that the US may behind the scenes engage the Taliban and foment troubles over there. So that's one more layer. But China would actually look at it in a positive sense. And in the immediate, if you look at it in the immediate sort of chain of events, obviously this is not going to change much, but it's symbolically it's important, and this is how you have, this is how diplomatic messaging, this is how you, overtures are sort of sent out.
Yeah. So how exactly do you think this particular statement, what Taliban has said, is going to impact China's economic relationship with Afghanistan?
So if you look at it, on the ground, I mean, there have been some very interesting announcements by China. So for as recently as May 2021, in a meeting with the foreign ministers from Central Asian countries, the Chinese foreign minister spoke about the Belt and Road Initiative and its importance. And Central Asia also fits into this whole sort of network which China is creating. And if you look at the Belt and Road Initiatives via Afghanistan, Central Asia and Iran fit into the scheme of things. They're very important. In fact, if you look at two of the projects, for instance, if you look at the China-Afghanistan special railway transport project, that the aim is to ultimately, connect not just up till Iran, but even Central Asia. You have Central Asian countries also as part of that. Similarly, if you look at even another 5 nations rail project, there also Central Asia fits in. It's important, basically. So the China-Afghanistan relationship there are 3 important fundamentals to it. One is obviously, as I said, in the context of broader connectivity. How is that achieved? That is achieved by the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, that, again, there are layers to it. You have some connectivity projects which have already started, but they are very slow. And on the ground, the infrastructural projects, China has been skeptical about them, that until the security situation improves. Then you have the other aspect of the extension of the China-Pakistan economic corridor up till Afghanistan. That's another point. Now that again, given the fact that Pakistan itself is sort of perplexed at what is happening, though we believe that Pakistan behind the scenes already was engaging with sections of the Taliban, but they have their own issue about refugees, about how, at this point of time, they're also worried that how the security situation is going to impact Pakistan. So the connectivity projects as of now, again, in the shorter run, I don't see, much happening. Ultimately, it's about, as we said earlier, resolving this current imbroglio.
So, of course, as you know, Taliban has made a huge statement, and the countries around are watching closely what is the kind of relationship that is going to evolve. So, how do you think it's going to affect the geopolitics of the region?
So, I think, one, as I sort of made a mention that, if you look at South Asia itself, India is obviously opening up channels to the Taliban. If you look at, for instance, the foreign minister's visit to Tehran, where the Taliban delegation was there itself. So there are 2 goals. One is the short-term goals, as far as, ensuring the security of citizens is concerned. The second is the long-term goals. And I think it would be a mistake for anyone to make any predictions. All you can do is you can sort of outline, even policymakers would be actually flagging that, what are the main threats, what are the main challenges, what are the best case scenarios, what are the roles of various players. Now, coming back to that, I think one country which has a very important role and whose role should be watched closely is Iran. So Iran actually has 750,000 Afghan refugees. Recently, as you would be knowing, one of the strategic border points with Iran was also captured by the Taliban. And obviously, that border point is close to Herat. So strategically, it's important. That's one side of it. Alongside it, you also had the Taliban delegation, as I mentioned, in Tehran last week, where the present foreign minister categorically said that, ultimately you need a political solution for all these issues. So apart from the fact that, Iran would be worried about more refugees, and the closure of border points actually means a sort of termination of economic linkages, which are important. The other worry is also, obviously you need to look at it also from the dimension of, the Shia-Sunni angle. And if you obviously the rise of radicalism once again, Sunni radicalism would pose a threat, not just to Shias all over the region, but specifically, Iran is a Shia nation. So it brings up that whole thing about that whole Sunni Shia dimension. In recent years, when you look at the geopolitics of the Middle East, it's very different. But when you look at, if you look at South Asia, Central Asia, and somewhere this Shia Sunni angle does play up, and this will further get exacerbated if that is one of the worries. And one more point which I would like to add is it's also been, analysts have very rightly said that if you look at Iran, unlike the Middle East, it doesn't really have proxies, in Afghanistan, right? So that is one more problem they face. But now these are the challenges for Iran. Iran also has opportunities, and this is where you need to look at the larger global picture. If US is engaging with Iran over JCPOA, it could probably, for instance, make some concessions and show greater urgency. And because even the hardline lead, the new leader in Iran, who's hardline, incoming president, he also would be worried about, in a way, because as I said, when you look at the Shia-Sunni divide, that creates complications. So behind the scenes, the US could make some concessions to Iran and also utilize them in back channels. We've spoken about the GCC countries, but Iran also has its own utility. Since it's worried about the security implications, the overall economic implications, it may actually, there could be a possibility of this happening. So I think we need to look beyond, conventional, this whole aspect, as we had said earlier also, about, geopolitical blocks and China on the one hand, US. And Iran is a perfect example of that. I think if some pragmatism is shown by the US, I don't think that Iran would really sort of refuse that offer. And Iran itself, again, if the GCPOA terms and conditions can be liberalized, it benefits Iran. So domestically, you can actually show that you've achieved a sort of victory. So to end it, basically, I would like to say that one, various layers, as we always say, no simple answers. And I think this time analysts have realized that. Earlier, analysts in the West would make predictions and everything. You can just basically provide, trends and what are the possible challenges. Second, you really need to exhibit, negotiators need to exhibit flexibility. Negotiations are carried out at various levels. So nobody really knows, what the ultimate outcome is. But all what can be said is that the ultimate solution is having a leader who can deal with the outside world, who's savvy diplomatically, but who also has legitimacy and who's not looked at as a pure prop of the West. This is what,
Yeah. Thanks a lot for joining us. And I'm sure that this discussion was really fruitful to our viewers. And it'll be interesting to see how Taliban's relationship with China pans out and what is going to be the impact of it on the geopolitics of the region. Keep watching us. We'll be back next week on Global Chit-Chat.